Hello. Today we will be reviewing appendicular anatomy to prepare you for the lab. To begin, there are 126 bones in the appendicular skeleton, and those are divided up into four main groups: the pectoral girdle, the upper extremity, the pelvic girdle, and the lower extremity. Let's take a look at what this looks like. This is the entire skeleton. The axial skeleton is indicated with the purple highlight, while the appendicular skeleton is indicated without a highlight. Our attention will be on the latter for this video. The first for review will be the pectoral girdle. It only has two bones, the clavicle and the scapula. The scapula has some key terms you will want to remember. One in particular is often confusing for students, the coracoid process. It is confusing because it is very similar to another term we will see later on. Keep in mind that the coracoid process is on the scapula. The upper extremity contains all the bones of the arm and hand. The proximal end, meaning the end closest to the shoulder, is the brachium. The brachium has only one bone, the humerus. Moving more distally away from the shoulder, we are in the antebrachium. The antebrachium contains the radius and the ulna. The radius is easy to remember because it is on the lateral side, where the thumbs are. It is the rad bone. After that, there are the bones of the hand, which are the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. On the humerus, we can see some identifying structures that you will need to know. One of the highlights is the head of the humerus, which is seen at the proximal end of the bone. The head of the humerus will articulate with the glenoid cavity of the scapula. This joint has a great deal of freedom of movement, specifically because of the shallow depth of the glenoid cavity. It allows us to have very flexible upper extremities. Another key structure you will want to know is the coronoid fossa, which is located at the distal end of the humerus. This sounds incredibly similar to the coracoid process that we reviewed earlier. Remember, coracoid process for the scapula, coronoid fossa for the humerus. Next, we have the radius and ulna. Some key structures on these bones are the olecranon process, which will articulate with the olecranon fossa of the humerus, the coronoid process, which will articulate with the coronoid fossa of the humerus, the radial head, which articulates with the capitulum of the humerus, and finally, the styloid processes of the radius and ulna. Lastly, in the upper extremity will be the bones of the hand. Try to familiarize yourself with all the names of the carpals. The metacarpals and phalanges are easy. Just count from 1 to 5, starting from the thumb. Next, we will briefly review the pelvic girdle. There are 3 bones in the pelvic girdle: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. These bones are fused together to form the hip bone, known in anatomical terms as the os coxa. The ilium will be the most superior bone, the ischium will be the bone on the posterior inferior side, and the pubis is the anterior inferior bone of the os coxa. Key structures are the acetabulum, which will house the head of the femur, the ischial tuberosity, which will be an attachment site for the posterior compartment leg muscles, and the 2 rami of the pubis, the superior of which will connect with the pubic symphysis, the joint that connects the 2 halves of the os coxa. Lastly, we will review the lower extremity. The lower extremity will be comprised of the femur, the tibia, fibula, the tarsals, metatarsals, and the phalanges. Let's review them. We see some interesting structures on the femur, such as the head of the femur. This sits inside the acetabulum of the pelvis. The acetabulum wraps around it very differently than the glenoid cavity does for the head of the humerus. Here, because the head of the femur must provide strength and stability for the torso that rests upon it, the acetabulum restricts freedom of movement by housing the head of the femur within it. As we reviewed before, this is quite different from the head of the humerus, which is sitting on top of only a slight depression of the glenoid cavity. The tibia and fibula are the bones of the lower leg, and they articulate with the femur via the condyles. The condyles, interestingly, are not shared between the tibia and fibula. Instead, only the tibia has condyles, and the fibula merely offers support to the tibia. We are now at the end of the road of the appendicular skeleton. Like with the hand, the important structures to familiarize yourself with will be the tarsals, while the metatarsals and phalanges are just identified numerically, starting with the big toe. That concludes our pre-lab video on the appendicular skeleton. This should provide you with some basic information that will aid in your understanding of the lab content.